Okay. Good day, everybody. My name is Christopher Horn. I'm a language consultant for the British Council, and I'm going to be the host for this second session of the New Directions Conference, Impact and Consequences of Technology. This second presentation is titled Detecting and Responding to Malpractice in Automated Scoring Systems, and it will be delivered by Rose Klesham, Director of Academic Standards of Measurements in Research. She's based in London, and she's been working in the area for all modes of assessment, especially interactional assessments. She's also been quite busy with artificial intelligence. Let's now proceed, but before we go, I should like to remind you to please keep your microphones muted and cameras off at all times. And if you have any questions or comments, just please type them in the chat box, and after the presentation, I'll make sure that I'll read them out to the presenter so that they can entertain all kinds of questions. The Q&A session will last for 10 minutes, and I should also like to remind you that this session is being recorded. Ms. Rose, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll just get my slides up. Oh, sorry, hang on. Can you see it now?
Not just yet.
Okay, can you see it now?
Unfortunately not.
Right, hang on. I'll.
Yes.
Okay. I'll leave it on this mode, I think. Yeah, I'll leave it like this. Yeah, you can see that now.
Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
Okay, good. Okay, right. Thanks everybody for joining. Sorry, slight delay. Yeah, I'm going to talk about sort of malpractice in automated systems. It seems to be quite a sort of hot topic at the moment, which for some of the reasons I'll talk about. This idea of, you know, cheating and malpractice and gaming seems to be on a lot of people's minds, really, both from, I suppose, from the test taker's point of view in some ways, but also from test agencies. What do we mean by this? Well, clearly, you know, the idea of cheating and sort of this idea of, you know, gaining some advantage, acting dishonestly in terms of, well, various things to do with taking tests, which I'll talk about in a second, you know, and in fact, most of it is clearly improper and illegal. But the idea of gaming and hacking in tests is a fairly recent addition. How is this the same, or is it different to sort of like malpractice and cheating in sort of paper-based tests? Well, one thing probably just to remind ourselves is that, you know, sort of trying to gain some advantage, especially in high stakes tests, is really nothing new. These images are things that I, you know, sort of talk about when I talk about sort of AI systems. If you look at the top three diagrams horizontally at the top, well, they are actually sort of Confucian exams, you know, and obviously the middle top diagram there are sort of individual cells that even, you know, sort of thousands of years ago, it was felt necessary to sort of lock candidates away so they couldn't sort of gain any advantage. And obviously, you know, under sort of quite heavy invigilation sort of procedures. And if you think about the middle line there, you know, the modern day sort of paper-based exams don't look too dissimilar, really. You know, it is a written form. Normally, high stakes exams are sort of almost like a one-shot test where you turn up at an examination room at a particular time of the day on a particular date. And again, sort of human invigilation. The bottom diagrams are obviously ways in which probably we're all sort of familiar with the ways that sort of people have sometimes found ways to try and sort of cheat the system. So the middle diagram there is obviously somebody with extremely small writing that's put sort of mathematical formulas on their nails. The diagram on the right is actually an eraser, a rubber that actually has got sort of written text hidden within it. And funnily enough, you know, the diagram on the left-hand side at the bottom it does actually go back to the Confucian cells, and it is actually a piece of underwear. Because they were sort of locked in those cells for a few days to carry out civil service exams, and that bottom diagram is sort of some sort of discovered underwear that was just covered with information. But if you think about sort of what the ways in which people game tests that probably are that people are aware of. I suppose the idea of sort of stolen scripts is something that that does it happens rarely, but it does happen. I was involved in this country and sort of on national testing for many years, and occasionally even you would get situations where exam papers literally like fell off the back of a lorry and fell into sort of unscrupulous hands. Clearly, if somebody knows the answers, then they're you know they are going to have sort of unfair advantage over somebody taking the test in good faith. Sitting in an exam hall, potentially, yes, you know, you might sort of look to one side if the desks aren't particularly well placed, and actually literally just copy whatever's going on next to you. And in terms of the sort of ways that people, as time has moved on, you know, have tried to manipulate the systems, yes, it has gone from people writing all over their body to try and sort of take into the exam hall information to help them, to secreting bits of sort of information, written information on, you know, in up their sleeves or in their pencil case or, you know, somewhere on their body. And of course, sort of moving now towards the idea of using electronic devices to take into exam halls that then they can gather information. So these show electronic watches that have got sort of loaded data on them. And the middle picture there at the bottom is actually sort of a Google Watch, where actually it looks like it's a Google glasses. So it looks like it's a sort of a normal pair of glasses, but in fact, it actually beams sort of internet pictures. And these things these days are becoming more evident that people are trying to use them, and therefore it's there incumbent on test centres and testing agencies to try and combat their use. And again, if you think about then this movement of exams and the modes of exams, then, you know, from being in a situation maybe 10, 15 years ago where people generally were found in exam halls with those type of challenges, these days then we're shifting to obviously individualized testing centres where people book tests and go in and have a sort of test when ready mode. And then even now, and particularly, you know, in the present circumstances, the diagram on the right shows a sort of a remote proctored exam where people are taking tests at home, but their test taking is monitored in various ways by an external sort of testing agency. So situations have changed and are continuing to change in terms of how people take tests, but also how we need to be mindful of malpractice. So if we go back to how we can attempt to stop cheating on a sort of on an individual or on a cohort basis. When scripts are in whole paper scripts, which the diagram there at the top shows, really in many ways you're fairly restricted in the way that you can actually monitor for malpractice. The diagram at the top there is just simply a seating plan, And so for most exam centres, that are particularly for high stakes exams, they would submit a seating plan. And so when those scripts are marked, the person, the examiner that's doing the marking, if they have any suspicions that maybe two scripts look fairly similar, then the first port of call would be to actually look at the seating plan and see who's sitting next to who. And the likelihood is, if you noticed anything, it probably would be that. And I've done that myself in the past, where you get packs of scripts, they're coming from a particular centre, you've got seating plans, you know where candidates were. And so if you do start to see similarities of response, you would, first of all, you would just check to see whether those people were sitting in proximity to each other. It might be that you'd see a whole paper script and it's just too good to be true, that the performance is just really good. And again, that might raise suspicions. But you can see how in that sort of mode of testing, the overall view of the world is somewhat limited by at an individual examiner level. What's happened now for most paper-based marking, for example, at national testing levels, is that exam papers are not marked as full scripts. They are sort of sent to places that actually separate out all the questions and then put them on screen and then send those items around to be marked. And what happens then is the examiners mark particular questions, lots and lots of, let's say, question number 7 for, let's say, 300, 400 people. And so you don't see then a full script. You don't, and therefore what you can't see are those patterns that you can see on a full paper script. So what happens in those sort of situations when scripts are marked at item level is that the systems themselves start to look for patterns. They look for patterns of unusual mark distributions. They look for patterns within a cohort, let's say a whole centre, of where, let's say, candidates seem to be getting exactly the same questions right and wrong. In some cases where the mark distributions are, again, maybe too good to be true. So there are statistical measures that exam boards now use to actually look at just the data that's coming from item level performances. But in automated marking systems, in other words, the assessments that I work in now are AI assessments for English language testing that use that the whole test is marked automatically. So the reading and the listening questions are closed question types, so they sort of are right, wrong, multiple sort of closed questions. But the speaking and the writing, because they're clearly, every one of those responses is different, they are marked by AI, okay? And they do that by engine training. So all items are sort of trialed and pre-tested by quite a large cohort of people. They look at, lots of responses are taken to train an engine to that the scripts, whether they're speaking or whether they're written, have been marked by expert human raters, and then those marks and responses have been put into an engine training to train the engine to predict a new response. Those scoring rubrics and I'll show just very briefly just the train that the engine training goes through now in a second, but those scripts then, basically, the whole system works by applying rules. They apply rules in terms of, the performance of let's say, low attaining work, the rules of high attaining work, but they also have rules of acceptance. So they have rules for example, if you were asked to write an essay that had 300 words, and you chose to write 500 words, then there would be rules that would be applied that would either not allow that performance at all, or it would be somehow penalised. If you decided to write in a different language, the systems would not be able to recognise the language. And in fact, what happens in most cases is it is rejected, but it is unusual responses like that are then checked. So there are rules, levels of rules put into place. And so, of course, it follows on that you can then apply rules to observable features that we don't want to see. So just before I just quickly talk about that, just to again remind you, for speaking items, every single item is pre-tested, is actually pre-tested by hundreds and hundreds of students. They don't know actually they're being pre-tested because most of these items are actually pre-tested in live scripts, where the extra items are added for training purposes. Those items then are transcribed, this is for speaking items, are transcribed, marked by human raters, and then fed into a system, which is there then, it is locked down and is then said to be trained to be able to predict new responses. On a validity level, then hundreds more sort of responses are then fed into the machine learning engine. Again, they are then also human marked, and then we compare the expert human marking with the machine scores, and if they are highly correlated, then that item can therefore be used in a live setting. And the same, and so and once you feed those sort of responses or oral responses into systems, we can get all sorts of information about the way that the person is speaking. Obviously, there is a transcription sort of part to the system as well. So once it's in there, we can actually detect not just the quality of the response, but any feature that we might be particularly interested in. And the same goes for writing. The writing is pre-tested, they're human scored. We put them, we sort of train the machines on hundreds and hundreds of different responses to a particular response, and then we validate it by trying out hundreds more, get them human marked as well, and then make sure that the human markers are correlating very highly with the machine scores. In these cases, and I think the point I suppose will make in this session is that even though AI and automated responses looks like it takes the human out of the equation, actually it's the human that is at the heart of it, because it is the human judgments that first of all make all the quality judgments about the quality of responses, whether they're speaking or whether they're writing. But in terms of what I'm talking about in this session, it is actually human judgments that actually initially make all the judgments about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of gaming or malpractice. For both, I suppose, just to say, for writing and for speaking, the point about AI systems is that they see things in many, many different dimensions, whereas for human raters and for paper-based scripts, that just is not the way they're set up. So the AI systems, you can look at it in various dimensions, and that can be extremely useful for interrogation in terms of the quality of the response and the diagnostic of that response, but it's also very useful for actually denoting whether there's something unusual happening, not just in regard to that response, but in regard to that response compared to other things it's seen, because of course it's just got a brighter horizon with which to compare any responses. So how do people try and game the systems? Well, and I suppose the first thing I'd say is that this first one about item harvesting and people trying to go into tests and taking items back and then trying to remember them and telling other people, versions of this happen in any mode of testing. But in automated systems, then the way that obviously they have to be mitigated include these sorts of things. Okay, there are very high security procedures, so people cannot go into testing centres that use sort of AI testing with any sort of Google glasses. All those things are actually physically removed, There are invigilators that are sort of quite sort of high ratios of invigilators to people. There are CCT monitoring sort of systems set up, and people are not allowed to physically take anything out of the centre. There are very large item banks, and that allows the creation of countless different randomized test forms, which means that you're not going to be able to go in, sort of come out and remember an exam paper, because whoever goes in afterwards is not going to see that exam paper. The chances of them seeing another item that you have seen is actually very small. And there are then rules about test exposure, and we retire items on basis sometimes for good, and sometimes they go on holiday. Sometimes we give them a holiday for maybe a year or two, and then bring it back, so that there's a constant sort of monitoring of the way that items are exposed. And also, because all that data is held and can be done so very quickly on a sort of on a global basis, we keep a very close eye on the item performance data, just to check that it's not being, somehow the performance of that item is not increasing, sort of, if you know, for no good reason. There are a number of weird anecdotal hacking tricks that are out there. And again, if you go on the internet, they are quite bizarre, but they have somehow, they gain traction. There's money clearly to be made with people that sort of sell their wares in terms of ways that you can beat the system. So they say things like, well, if you do a speaking test, if you speak very quickly, you'll get a higher score. If you speak very loudly, or if you keep talking and don't just have to stop when the item finishes. All of these things are nonsense. Weird things like, if you'll find some sites that talk about, don't press the back key when you're writing responses, because if you use the back key, you will be marked down. These are stupid nonsense, but it's surprising how much traction they get, because people will try and gain some sort of advantage.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we're almost running out of time. So
yeah, if you give me another minute or so, I've just got one more slide to do. Okay. So these sort of weird hacking tricks, we would check these all the time. But the thing that's probably the most worrying are the thing that's the worrying one out of these is the use of templates and plagiarism, because these are the ones that I think people think they can get away with. And the point I've tried to make at the end here, just before we finish, is that actually, funnily enough, the supposed weakness of AI systems and automated systems in terms of using templates and plagiarism is actually AI can deal with these way better actually than paper-based ones can. Because just like I said earlier, because we can not just train the systems on the quality of the responses, we can actually set rules in place where we are looking for responses that look similar to other things that we've seen. We can detect templates and then add that to the algorithm. So as soon as the systems see or hear a template, we can then, in a way, take it aside, like you would in an airport carousel, where your bags are sort of just taken to one side to check it. These things are possible in AI systems, whereas actually they're not possible in paper-based systems. So the supposed weakness actually becomes a strength. And I'll just finish by saying, the most important feature of these is not just that the technology is really necessary to catch them, but also that the judgments of where the line is in terms of acceptable and non-acceptable responses is actually taken at a human level, not initially by the AI systems. It is humans that actually make the decisions about where that line is. And then when we've decided where the line is, then we can actually apply that rule to our engine training systems.
thank you very much, Rose. I'm sorry I had to speed it up a little bit. I already have, in fact, 2 questions from the audience, and I would like to put them to you. The first one, and both come from the same person, And the question is, how do test designers decide how large the item bank needs to be?
Well, there are sort of industry standards on that, really. You would probably find that most testing agencies will never reveal the size of their item bank. But you can imagine if you've got a test, let's say like the test that I'm describing here, the PT Academic test, which is a global test of English proficiency that is used anywhere in the world. If you're going to have randomized tests that are taken so that pretty much anybody that goes in will not see the complete set of questions that anybody else will see, then that item bank will have to be many thousands of items.
The second question from the same person, Damien Dwyer. How do you determine if a response is a template or if a learner writing speaking has similar features?
That's the key question, really, because as I sort of mentioned in one of the slides,
Yeah.
when you speak, if you were doing a speaking assessment or you were doing a writing assessment, we all have ways and phrases that we use in good faith. So I think that this thing is not a fixed form. This thing is a dynamic situation we're in. When I'm talking about sort of malpractice and cheating, I think we do make a distinction here. And generally speaking, what we do is we try and identify the really clear-cut offenders. I can assure you, when you actually extract samples, so basically what we do is we monitor all our responses, but whether they're written or whether they're speaking, and look for these patterns, look for templates. When we think we found them, when we think we found a template, whether it's a partial or a full template, then groups of human experts have to get together to decide, is that over the line or not? Is that just something, let's say, like it's a set phrase, but actually it's a sort of phrase that all of us may use in a written or a spoken response. But where we have to draw the line, I can assure you, people just think that if let's say just keep repeating the same phrase over and over again, or if they keep writing phrases, that they're not too difficult to spot. Look for them, and then we have to categorize them in terms of what type of templates they are. You're on mute, Chris. Mute. You're on mute, Chris.
Sorry. Are the formulas to determine item bank size publicly available?
Individualized from testing agencies, probably not, but there are industry standards. Best, there are quality assurance that will give you indicators of the size of the item bank for depending on the size of tests, the size of cohorts, and usually it's to do with the best practice in terms of item exposure, whether an item is exposed in a public test over a set period of time or a set number of attempts, of its use. So you can calculate then how large your item bank is, depending on the number of people that you're planning that the test will take and how long and how many items.
Okay, thank you very much.
But if you're talking about a big test, a global test, it is many thousands.
Okay, the time has come to an end, so I must conclude this session here. Thank you very much to Rose Glesham for her interesting presentation about test taking and marking and by artificial intelligence. So the next one will be conducted by, we will have a small break now, and the next presentation will be by Dr. Vahid Arhiaduste and Lim Mei Hui, and it will be about a scientometric review of computer-assisted language learning research. So it will take place in about 40 minutes from now, and I shall see you there then.